Hi, this is Brett Ingram, award-winning entrepreneur, and today I want to share with you what the NBA playoffs can teach us about business. So the NBA playoffs are right now in full swing, and we have one exciting game after another. While there are obviously some blowouts here and there, and those aren't quite as exciting, the fact of the matter is to watch what these guys can do on a basketball court, the sheer athleticism, the just amazing performances, and their ability to play the sport at such a high speed and high level is absolutely remarkable. And then when you throw in there the fact that you have everybody competing, it's the best teams in the league already, and then they're all competing to see who's the overall best and who's going to win the title. And so the NBA playoffs bring out the best in all the players because they know that there's only one team that's going to be able to hold the trophy. So during the regular season, you may have 82 games and you can win some, lose some, and still make the playoffs. It's also hard to keep that intensity up for 82 straight games. But when you get into the playoffs, it's basically you move on or you move out at each particular level. And so it's a heck of a lot of fun to watch. I don't even pay attention much to the regular season, but I love the NBA playoffs because I find it absolutely fascinating to watch some of the performances and to see what some of these people are capable of doing. That said, in addition to just the pure entertainment value, there are actually some really interesting parallels that work well with business as well. And so if we look behind the scenes and we look through a different lens at the various game from a larger stand back viewpoint, we can see that there are some really cool parallels of business. The first of them is that competition can be fierce. It can be absolutely fierce. Like we see this in the NBA playoffs. We see performances where there might be a team, and I think last night, the Knicks were up by 6 points, I think, with under 30 seconds to go, and the 76ers came down, and they ended up tying the game in the final 30 seconds and going into overtime and then going on to win. So the competition can be absolutely fierce. There are a lot of back and forth games. The difference between the top team and the bottom team is so small that on any given night, any team could win a game. Now, obviously, they're all playoff series, so the likelihood that one team that's a huge underdog will win a whole series is lower. But on any given day, if they have a hot shooting night and the other team is off a little bit, anything can happen. And so competition can be absolutely fierce. And obviously that's a great parallel to business because depending on what industry we're in and depending on what our business model is, there's going to be competition. And in general, the more money there is to be made, the more opportunity there is, the greater the competition. If it isn't there now, it will be soon. So even with disruptive technologies where we may feel we have a blue ocean to play in for right now, the fact of the matter is it's not going to last. Because if there's money to be made there, competition is soon to follow. And that's always the general rule in business. So no matter where we are competitively right now in whatever business we're in, we always have to be looking over our shoulder. We always have to be innovating. We always have to be thinking about who might try to knock us off the pedestal. Who do we need to worry about? Who's going after the same customers? Who has a better offering than we might have? One of the great business stories that I've ever heard, and I've always retold it because I found it so fascinating, was there was a company called Quad Graphics, and they basically were a graphic design company. And one of the things that this company did is they prided themselves on innovation. And so the CEO, the owner of the company, one of the things that he would do is he would tell all of the team, the staff, the company, we always want to be innovating. We always want to be finding ways to do things better. So he rewarded them for taking chances. It didn't matter if they failed, keep taking chances. But the crazy part about it is that every time they came up with a new innovation that made the graphic design business better, easier, faster, more profitable, they sold it. They turned around and they licensed it and sold it to their competitors. So any advantage they would have had from that, they basically gave away right away. But when you think at first, while it sounds like insanity, it's actually ingenious. Because the minute that you create something that you think gives you an advantage, there can be a tendency to take the foot off the gas pedal. And that is very dangerous. Companies that have done that have found themselves in trouble. Some have even gone out of business. And when we keep our foot on the pedal because we know our competition's right on our heels, we're always going to be innovating. In addition to that, it's a profit center for the business because they're selling it. They're not giving it away. So they're actually generating revenue by doing it. So it's a win. It keeps the employees incentivized to continue to innovate. And at the same time, it generates more revenue for the business. And it's an absolutely fascinating business model. And I always loved that story because I believe it's really a great model of how we can run our own businesses and be really successful. Second thing we could take from the NBA playoffs about business is that we all have to work with what we've got. Okay? There are teams, there are coaches that come into the playoffs, and on paper, they've got a fantastic roster. But you got a guy who's out with illness. You got a guy who's ineligible for this reason. You got a guy who's injured, whatever it is. So you have to duct tape together a lineup in order to be able to figure out how you're going to compete. Now, you could complain, and you could go to the press, and you could say, we're without our star player, and we're without this, and we're without that. And you can basically resign yourself to losing, which is essentially what would happen. Or you could do what NBA coaches and all professional coaches are taught to do. And that is, look, we play the way we play and we play with who we've got. Would it be nice to have these other players? Absolutely. We don't have them, so we know that we have enough to win anyway. They have to say the right things. They have to coach the team the right way. Obviously, in their heart of hearts, they know that if they had the other players, it would be different. It's the same similar thing in business, right? We always have whatever our situation is. And we can look at somebody else. We can look at the neighbor. We can look at our competitor. And we can say, oh, geez, that would be so nice. Look at this person. They grew up. Their parents gave them an X amount of money to start a business. They started a business. It wasn't even going well. The parents bailed them out. They're on to their second business. So it would be great to have all that. That may or may not be true. On the one hand, sure, it'd be great to have that, to know that we could start easily. But the flip side of that is it's also harder to feel as accomplished because so much was given to you. So much was, you had such a head start. When you build it from the ground up by yourself, then you have nothing but pride because you did it all yourself. And first of all, there's always two ways to look at it. But the other element of it is it doesn't matter. We can complain about the advantages other people have. We can complain about how hard we've got it. We can complain about, oh, woe is me, this happened, that happened. But nobody cares. All that matters is what we do with what we've got. So whatever that is, whatever our advantages are, we want to try to find those and magnify them, elevate them, leverage those. Whatever our drawbacks or detriments or shortcomings are, we want to minimize those, or we want to compensate for those by bringing in people or doing things that help minimize the impact those things have on us. And we want to try to use whatever we can to our advantage because we all have to work with what we've got, and that's ultimately the only option that we've got. The third thing that we can learn about business from the NBA playoffs is that circumstances aren't always ideal, but we need to show up and push through anyway. This is related to the other one, but it's also different because this is our own personal circumstance in terms of you see a guy that maybe he can play, he's in the lineup, but he's got a hurt leg, he's got a pulled calf muscle, or he's got a broken nose, so he has to wear a mask, or he's got a strained wrist, or whatever it is. It might not seem like a big deal, and to the average person it probably is not. But if you're trying to play a sport at the highest level, against the highest level of competition, in the highest stakes games you're ever going to play, it's really difficult because every little bit matters, every little advantage, every little disadvantage. I remember Larry Bird was always my favorite NBA basketball player. I grew up a huge Celtics fan. My father grew up in Cape Cod, so I grew up a New England sports fan, and Larry Bird was always my favorite. And one of the things I loved about him is that he didn't have that pure athleticism that a lot of the other guys had to rely on. So he had to use all of his other tools. But one of the stories that he used to tell that I always was fascinated about was the fact that before games, he would go, and the parquet floor is what they used to call it at the Boston Garden. It's TD Bank Garden or something now, but it used to be the Boston Garden in the old days. And the funny thing is, the wooden floor that they had was not always totally even and stable. There were areas where the boards were a little bit looser. They were lacquered and stuff, so it wasn't a risk of injury to anybody. But there were a couple of places where if you bounced the ball, it would bounce a little bit differently. It would take a funny hop, or it would bounce a little bit lower, or not bounce back as high or whatever. And Larry Bird would get on his hands and knees before each game, and he would tap on the floor in various spots so he could find those weak spots. This is the level of competitor this guy was. And what he would do is, when he saw an opponent dribbling and they got right near that spot, that's when he would go for the steal, because he knew the ball was going to take a slightly different bounce. And that's all he needed, because it comes down to that little bit sometimes of a difference between winning and losing, or making the play or not. And so whatever injuries we've got, if we're fatigued, if we have some sort of a disability, if we have some sort of a lot of stress in our lives, or we don't live in a great place, or there's kids running around the house and we can't focus on what we're doing, whatever those circumstances are, they may not be ideal. We may fantasize about having a circumstance or situation that's better, but it doesn't matter. We need to show up and we need to push through anyway. When I was starting my business, I was raising a family, working full time, and going to graduate school. I know that if I can do it and work through that, you can do it, and we all can do it if we're dedicated, we're committed, and we have to just focus on what we can do and not worry about what other people might have that's better than us or whatever. The fourth lesson that we can take from the NBA playoffs and apply it to business is the old saying, teamwork makes the dream work, baby. No matter how good any individual player is on any individual team. The fact of the matter is, there are always players that step up and make heroic performances, and sometimes it's the people we expect the least. But it's the fact that they work together that helps them to win games. In last night's game, the thriller between the Knicks and the 76ers, Joel Embiid is the big superstar for the 76ers, and I think he had a fine game, but it was actually Maxey that had the stellar game. He scored all these points down the stretch. He had a 40-plus point night and literally carried the team to victory. Now, on another night, it might be Embiid, but the fact is, one player can't do it alone. And so the fact that Maxey stepped up and played that way was fantastic. In the Celtics' last win, Derek White stepped up and had a massive game. Obviously, Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, they've got some amazing players. And people often overlook a guy like Derek White. But the fact is, he came to play, and he, in a lot of ways, set the tone that night for the team, and they ended up winning the game. It requires a team to make it all work. And when we're in business, whether that team is actual people in our office and we have a staff and everything else, or whether we're using outsourcers and freelancers and stuff like that, it doesn't matter. The fact is, as soon as we go beyond being a solopreneur, it matters who we have on the team. It matters that they're competent. It matters that they are able to sometimes carry more than their share of the load, because in an entrepreneurial environment, that's the way things work. We can't just take days off. We can't just say, oh, you know what, I didn't feel like working today. I'm going to go watch March Madness, and the office will still be there tomorrow, like you could if you worked at some conglomerate. In an entrepreneurial environment, it matters that everyone pulls their weight. And when we all do it, and we all do it at a high level, we can achieve amazing things. And that's why it's teamwork that makes the dream work. The fifth business lesson, or takeaway for business, or parallel, if you will, from the NBA playoffs, is that only performance wins games. Only performance. It doesn't matter your pedigree. It doesn't matter how many rings you have, how many titles you've got, how many MVPs, how many all-star games. None of that stuff matters. There's no better exemplification of this than this year's playoffs. All the most storied NBA players in the league, LeBron James, Steph Curry, Kevin Durant, all of these guys are exiting the playoffs, because at the end of the day, it's about the performance in the games that are being played. It's the what have you done for me lately? Again, they got the contract they did, they get the respect they did because of their past, and that's fair. But To win today, you have to perform today. You could score 60 yesterday, and that's awesome. If you score 6 today, you lose today. And it's performance that wins games. Entrepreneurship is a performance sport, right? It's a performance game. It's not about our prestige. It's not about our brand. It's not about what we've done in the past or our image or any of these other things. All of those things can help us. All those things can contribute to what we're doing. But ultimately, we have to get the work done to get the results that we want. And so we have to always show up and be ready to perform and know that our performance yesterday doesn't dictate our performance today. We can take confidence from that. We can take satisfaction from that, and we can be pleased about that and be proud about that. But we need to constantly look toward the future. We need to perform today to make the future better. And that's ultimately the way that it works. The sixth lesson from the NBA playoffs is that one loss is not the end. There's a reason that the NBA playoffs are series, because any given team on any given night can have a bad day. They can have a bad game. And so when you play a series of 7 games, it's not a fluke that's going to get you knocked out. If you have bad calls in one game, you have bad shooting night in one game, you got 2 or 3 players with the flu in one game, you can sustain that. You can lose the game and stay alive in the series. You have to win 4 games to win the series and move on. You can even lose 3. As long as you win 4, you're all set. Entrepreneurship is literally exactly the same. We can swing and swing, and we can miss a lot. We can strike out a lot. But if we keep going, all we have to do is keep going until we get to the point where we get that home run or we get that double into the gap that then we can leverage into something greater. I was watching a documentary on some company. I don't think it was Atari. It wasn't. It was Magic. It's a company called Magic. Absolutely fascinating documentary. Most people have never even heard of the company Magic. What's amazing about it is these guys actually created the prototype for the iPhone. They had all these inventions that were absolutely phenomenal. And one of the guys who was one of the young programmers and developers that they brought in was an absolutely stellar dude that was creating some great stuff. And the company ultimately went bankrupt, and he was devastated. He felt like a failure. He was totally lost. He didn't know what to do. Even though he was doing a really good job, ultimately, the company didn't survive. And so years later, he ended up developing the first, I believe it was the first, I don't know if it was iPad. No, it was the listening one. So the first one that it was like the little thing that you listen to where you don't have to put in the cassettes or the DVDs or the CDs for it to listen to it. The name escapes me right now, but he actually created the very first one of those, went on to make obviously gazillions of dollars. Now he's a venture capital guy. He invests in other businesses and things like that. But it's absolutely fascinating because they had a devastating loss, rebounded, came back, and he was able to do that. And you see that same theme play out for entrepreneur after entrepreneur, where they had multiple failures, and then they get the one great one. And that is ultimately the thing that propels them into stardom and success. And it's why we know their names, right? The seventh parallel between the NBA and business is that great performances in clutch time create legends. Tyrese Maxey last night for the 76ers had an absolute clutch performance in a game the Sixers needed to win. And he went off, scored 40-something points, had all these points in crunch time and in overtime. And everybody is now lauding this guy. They're breaking down the film. They're talking about how amazing it is. Not that he wasn't a great player before, but when you have moments like that, when you have a great performance in clutch time when it matters, that will elevate us to legend status. And that is really cool in business, because if we're able to do something that's transcendent, if we're able to do something that really stands out and we come through in a way that's huge, that is something that can be rewarded, talked about, and we can be praised for years and years to come and leave a legacy that lives on into the future. which I think is just really cool. The NBA playoffs give us some of the most spectacular performances and dynamic athleticism we'll ever see. But beyond the actual entertainment value itself, we can glean some important and useful business lessons too. So the takeaway here is that the NBA is the home of the best basketball players in the world, and the playoffs heighten the competition to bring out the best in every single player. While we can marvel at what some of these players can do, we can also step back and see some parallels between basketball and business. When we take those parallels and lessons and we take them to heart and do our best to use them in our business and our life, maybe we can have an epic performance that will make us legends that people will talk about for years. But either way, we'll be better entrepreneurs for it.